Hello and welcome to Gender Equality Talks Season 2 hosted by CNS. In these talks, we hear from people on the front lines striving for gender justice worldwide. Global voices demanding that progress must be on track to deliver SDG 5 gender equality by 2030. We have with us today Azra Talat Sayeed, political activist from Pakistan. Azra ji is a globally recognized political activist advancing women's rights and peasant rights. She has made important contributions to gender justice and building peasant movements. Azra ji is the founder and executive director of Roots for Equity, a Karachi-based organization working with vulnerable and marginalized communities such as small and landless farmers, women, and religious minorities. Azra ji is the chairperson of Asia Pacific Research Network, APRN, as well as International Women's Alliance, a grassroots alliance of women's organizations, networks, and individuals. Azra ji has also served as vice chairperson of the International League of People's Struggle. Welcome, Azra ji. Pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thank you very much, Sumita. That's a very long introduction.
So much work you've done over the years with so many different kinds of marginal populations, the peasant movements, the women's movement, small and landless farmers. So in our conversation today, where we are going to be talking about Goal 5 SDG and what kind of progress we've made on this. Maybe we should just start by talking about, do you think the world is on track to deliver Goal 5 on gender equality?
Not at all. I think absolutely way behind. And to be very frank, I don't think there was ever any intent to be on track or to reach whatever claims they had made in 2015. I think the people's organizations, the women's organizations in particular, had already pointed that out during the prep meetings in which we from Roots for Equity had also participated. And then also once they had been developed, the 17 SDGs. And I do talk from the women's perspective as well from the farmers' perspective. And of course, climate, which is, I think, Goal 14. I can't remember now which one it is. But, and all of them were targets which, if our governments had been politically motivated by the people's agenda, it's possible that we would have made headway. We may not have achieved everything, but at least there would have been a political will to go forward. I think to talk about Goal 15 or talk about Goal 5 or any of the 17 goals is really is a mockery of people's vision of development justice. So if you look at women, and I will speak about South Asia more in particular, but also larger Asia and Pacific, which I know very well. You know that now everybody will talk about COVID-19, the terrible years of COVID-19. Well, during the COVID-19 terrible years, there were people who went into space for a 2-hour vacational journey, and they had the money to do that. That in itself is a symbolic representation of where the elite of this world stand, particularly the monopoly capital, which rules the world right now, and us, the people. So whether it is education, whether it is health, whether it is transport, whether it is safety and security of women, which is a very critical issue, we don't have any serious policy orientation towards any of them. And if you look at Pakistan, I would say that the way they have allowed religious intolerance to flourish, the way they have used the religious stick to curtail women's mobility, women's rights, women's education, women's right to choice in terms of having a child or not, married, none of that is allowed. And I don't think India is any different from what is happening. If you look at Palestine, if you look at Kashmir, if you look at Philippines, I mean, it's a terrible state of affairs for all of us. I think you have been watching what's been happening in Jenin in the past 2-3 days. And the way they have been pulling out men and women and children, putting guns to children's heads. It's just unbelievable. I don't feel like I live with humans, the way we see the butchery on media, but also on our streets every day physically.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes. So, Azraji, I mean, despite there are so many different political commitments and declarations on legally binding treaties to advance gender equality and human rights that have been in force since the inception of the UN, our governments haven't been able to deliver on gender equality. So, why is it like this?
See, gender equality is part of a larger development paradigm. So women don't stand alone in society, they stand in society. And our society is intensely patriarchal. And there are two major pushers for that. One is, of course, class. We live in a class-based society. And the second is, of course, religious intolerance, to be very frank. Feudalism is entrenched, and when I say class, I say feudalism in our countries. Pakistan, for us, we call it a semi-feudal, semi-colonial state, because our policies are made by two sets of elite. One are inside the country, and the other is outside the country. And women, if you go towards the slave era was impossible without slave labor. And in today's capitalist era and in feudal era, labor is impossible without women's contribution. And they know that very well. That if women were given freedom, their entire production system, their highly subsidized system of production through women's labor will be exposed and trampled upon immediately. So they will maintain control over women's bodies and women's minds. And there are two ways of doing that: economically, by paying them nothing or paying them very little, or keeping a psychological grip on their minds, saying to be a liberated woman means to be a loose woman. That is how they equate it all the time. That if we ask for our liberation, it means we want something which is more sexual than just the right to use a mind, and that's also a very patriarchal trait. I believe that for men to live in those borders of sexual relationships is very important, and they look at women through their eyes. So if you talk about going out, if you talk about working, trying to get an education, the entire philosophy is that she wants to get rid of her husband, her brother, her father. And as if we don't have a mind, as if we are just an animal who's there to work. And a higher being, to be an intellectually higher being, has no meaning for them when it comes to a woman. And they derogate women, they will insult women, that's the psychological terror under which women live, where they are constantly being told, you know nothing, you are nothing. So it really builds in women's minds, and they are so afraid to step out into society. So that's why I say there are two reasons. One is to control labor, and the other is the method they use to control us is through the psychological terrorizing of our minds, of our bodies, which is, of course, very sexual also.
Yes, true. Maybe we should, at this point, talk also a little bit about economic justice and climate justice.
Yeah, most of the work that I have done through either EVA or through Roots for Equity, my home organization, which will be 25 years. It is now 25 years this year, and we are actually marking it on July 17th. So it's a great time to reflect. Economic justice under imperialism is not possible, And what is imperialism? Imperialism is not a slogan. Imperialism is a hard economic processes, methods of control. So I've talked about labor already. So it's not only women's labor, it's also everybody's labor. Every gender whether it is men, women, or all other genders. We are all labor to them. So control of labor is paramount. Then the second issue is under imperialism is resources. The chemicals, the minerals, the methods of production are all critical to monopoly capital. We have a handful of corporations which control our world. And I will elaborate on that.
We lost you a bit in the bit. So we can just, and you're muted right now.
Hi, yeah. Sorry, Sumita. I think no, I'm not muted.
It's fine. It's fine. I can hear you now. I can hear you. It's all good.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I was talking about economic control, and I was elaborating on labor. But apart from labor, we are also talking about the raw materials, the means of production. I'll give you an example of rare earth metals, which are very, very critical for semiconductors, for electric hybrid cars, and all of that. And you can see the wars that are going on now. I know that a big pile was discovered in Kashmir, the Indian side of Kashmir, and that is again, it kind of sends shivers through our bodies, because we know to get access to those minerals, the government of India will do anything. And what will happen? The rights of the Kashmiris will be trampled. Similarly, in our country, in Pakistan, we know in Balochistan, there is a huge deposit of many types of minerals, whether it is gold or silver, and so on. And that's why the self-determination, the right to self-determine ourselves as people is taken away by the corporations who need these resources. The World Trade Organization was formed in 1995, and we all know the kind of agreements they have. They have a whole array of agreements, about 60 agreements, of which the TRIPS agreement is critical for AI, artificial intelligence, for seed technology, especially the genetically modified organisms, and for various other products. There is another two agreements called SPS, the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement, and the Technical Barriers to Trade. When you talk about women, I will just highlight, I'll just take a minute to explain. SPS controls any food which is made from animals or plants, where all foods are made from animals or plants up till now. So this agreement, which was passed in 1995, is now playing out in Pakistan. Pakistan has created an internal domestic law called Pure Food Laws, where it is saying you cannot sell fresh milk in the market. Why not? It has to be pasteurized. Why? Because milk is very unsafe for drinking. We in the subcontinent, we have a history of 5,000 years. Nobody can deny that fact. And we have domesticated animals for 5,000 years. All our generations in the past to this day have drunk fresh milk. And it is not banned even in the United States of America, which is supposed to have the highest standards. So why are they banning fresh milk in Pakistan? Because Pakistan is the fourth largest producer of milk. And where does milk come from? Cows and buffaloes in general. There are other animals, but these two are the most commonly. What is the women's property in a rural society, in a feudal society, are their animals? In our jahez, in our crusade, when women get married, to this day, girls are given an animal to take with them. It's a property that a girl has rights to. Now, if she cannot have that milk in the market, if she has no control over that animal and the production from that animal, then who is going to lose? A majority of the women in my country, in the rural areas, 70% of my country lives in rural areas. And it is the women of my rural area, of my country's rural areas, who will suffer. For whom? For companies like Nestle, for Friesen Campina, all companies coming from the United States or Netherlands, EU, and then Australia. They have what we call specialty animals. They have a huge big cows. Maybe you've seen them, the Friesland cows and the so-called New Jersey cows. They eat 3 times our cows. They cannot walk. They have to be fed. They cannot stand the hot temperatures of the subcontinent. And our governments are importing those live animals into our territories and then saying, we cannot produce milk. So these bloody cows from the northern countries are going to be producing milk for my country. And who will suffer? The small and landless farmers, a majority of whom will be women. So this is all about genetically modified organisms. This is all about SPS. This is all about agreement on agriculture. The European government gives and the American government gives their farmers direct cash subsidies. They put money into their banks to underproduce, right? Because they have a surplus. And our farmers, who are the poorest in the world, their subsidies are being forced away by the IMF and its conditionalities. And that is what we call imperialism. When the very laws of production, where the resources of production, where the people who do the work are not being allowed to do what gives them not even a decent livelihood, but at least keeps away hunger. And that is what they are taking away. So in those circumstances, when we have the WTO, when we have the IFIs, the conditionalities of the International Monetary Fund, we have the ISDS, I think you have heard of that, the what is it called? Investor State Dispute Settlement, right? ISDS. Those laws which allow corporates to sue our governments, when a government takes steps to protect the rights of the people, they have ISDS. In Balochistan, when the government of Balochistan said our minerals should not be excavated, they should not be explored, and the government of Balochistan asked to stop the agreement with, I forget the name of the company, it's a Canadian company, gold mining company. That company sued Pakistan for $7 billion. $7 billion. A country like Pakistan, where is it going to pay it from? So that's what I mean. And who suffers? The people. The elite don't suffer. They have homes in Italy and in Rome and God knows where else. And they have these green, not Pakistani passports, but any other bloody passport from the imperialist countries. They take a plane and they're out. And who's left? It is the women. You saw Afghanistan, what happened in Afghanistan. Under Afghanistan, can we talk about women's rights? Can we talk about SDGs? For 20, 40 years, the Americans kept on saying women's rights, women's rights. We have come to liberate the women of Afghanistan. What nonsense, right?
Right. So, I mean, this whole thing of the, there's so much of a difference between the Western world and the communities that you are working with, the access to resources that they have. And, like you're saying, I mean, somebody is just basically trying to keep hunger away. It is such a desperate kind of a, living context. So in this context, when, if we want to, all the challenges that you flagged for us, and what are some of the things that the world should be doing right now to make sure that we are moving in the right direction and at the right pace?
I don't think it's the answer would be anything very drastically different or new. The one and only thing we can do is to organize ourselves. It is every nook and corner of our countries. The people have to understand the sources of this vicious power, the kind of mutilation of our people that is happening under military rule, religious rule, and the rule of our elite, whether they are bureaucrats or they are feudal elite or industrialists, of which we have same on both sides and across Asia Pacific. If you look at a country which is still Asia, Palestine, and if you look at a country like Philippines, which is also Asia, and we look at all our countries and we examine the situation, it's only difference of degrees. There is no real difference in what is happening. Myanmar, so many countries come to my mind. And who are the main culprits for this kind of viciousness? It is the corporate sector, mostly in the West, and we do also have China now in the game. And we see what is happening in Ukraine is a result of the Americans, especially the Americans and of course the Europeans, trying to curtail one of the same imperialist powers of which they are one. You know, if we talk about imperialism, we do have three countries now on the table. We have the United States, we have Russia, and we have China. But we cannot forget that China and Russia put together do not have even half of the military strength which the Americans do. And so for us, for many of us now across the globe, we are organizing ourselves to understand what imperialism is, what militarism is, who are the forces behind this intense unleashing of military power on us. You know, where do these weapons, where are they produced? That's, to me, that is one of the key questions. Where are these cluster bombs produced? Where is this artificial intelligence being produced that they can spy on our computers? So we have brutal chemical warfare, biological warfare, and weapons warfare, but we also have artificial intelligence warfare. So the realm of brutality on the people has spread, has widened, and it has changed forms. And this is what we need to know and understand. And we feel that women have to be organized to overcome not only patriarchy, which is very critical. When I work with the women in the fields, they are not fighting United States of America. They are fighting the men at home. They're fighting the feudal lord at home, you know. So one has to understand that the power, when you say a semi-colonial, semi-feudal state, the colonial masters, whom we thought we got rid of in 47, which we never did actually, are based in the north, in Europe or in the United States of America. They know they don't need to control us. They have put their people on the ground, which are the feudal elites, our militaries, and our governments. We are controlled by our governments directly. And so we need to educate and organize our women, our youth specifically, to understand what is the source of their hunger, of their not being educated, of them suffering from climate injustice, one after the other. I mean, India right now is again facing such heavy floods.
Absolutely,
and India
yes.
has opened waters from the borders, and the water is now coming towards Pakistan. Who's being destroyed? It is the people of India and the people of Pakistan. You know, no matter what the narration is and what people start saying that India has opened the gates. India has opened the gates, but what else can it do? Who's responsible for the bloody floods? Who's responsible for global warming? So we need to be very clear in our analysis and make sure that the analysis is grassrooted. It cannot be amongst these, I hate these English-speaking academics who believe they know everything, but they never step out of their universities, you know. It's all about going to the people, and people, they know the truth. If, I mean, the whole thing I'm telling you about milk, I learned from the women. What is happening? Why is the government of Pakistan throwing away our milk? And they're saying, this is what is happening. What do you think is going on? And then we started doing this Google and figuring out which law is being dictated by the Pure Food Law of Pakistan. It was SPS and TBT, which is a WTO agreement. So all this nonsense about health standards, 80% of Pakistanis do not have access to pure, clean water. 80% of Pakistanis. Whereas Nestle is running amok in the country and has access to mineral water in the country. And they're selling these plastic bottles, which is a source of climate pollution. Similarly, fresh milk, which we would buy directly from the milk sellers in the shops, they are selling in these Tetra Paks. The Tetra Paks are environmentally extremely hazardous. So you see, when we talk about climate imperialism is a subsector of imperialism. The false solutions that they give us through genetically modified seeds, controlled by the TRIPS agreement of the WTO, when they give us biodiesel and biofuels, agrofuels. What is agrofuels? Again, if you come back to the economic issue of women, we work with sugarcane farmers across the country, and sugarcane is not grown everywhere. So wherever sugarcane is grown, we found that the women were cutting the cane for nothing. They were not being paid. They are not being paid even now. They cut the cane, they take the fodder for their animals, and the feudal lord keeps the cane. Can you imagine if you have gone into a sugarcane field, the sugarcane is very high, it is intensely hot, and the leaves scratch your skin all over the place. And you're cutting that cane and cutting off the fodder and then leaving the cane there and coming back with the fodder for the livestock. And they're taking away the livestock. Second, the sugar cane stands for whole 12 months. So there is no other work for these women except waiting for the fodder to grow. The area where wheat was being grown, they're using cane to grow that. So there is food shortage. So they do not have, because wheat harvesting is done on barter system. If you cut the wheat, you take wheat home as your payment. You don't take money, which means they have a stock at home. They prefer that because men will take the money and throw it on smoking. That's what men do. They will smoke or they will do something else, and the money is gone. But if there is wheat, the women know they feed the kids. So we see that acre after acre of land is going to sugarcane. And why sugarcane? Because if the floods come, sugarcane still is able to resist. Whereas cotton, which is a very lucrative crop for the women because they do the cotton picking, it's totally destroyed. I'm talking about 2022 when the big floods came to Pakistan. There were hundreds and millions of women who lost cotton because cotton is being sown right now. In a couple of months, they will be picking that cotton, and that's when the storms, the floods start coming down, and the monsoon starts coming down. So the cotton is destroyed. So the feudal lord says, "I don't want to harvest cotton. I just want to have sugar." So it's a vicious circle. You see, you have to study the entire rural economy to understand. And then, like Karachi is flooded with immigrants from these rural areas, flooded. There are thousands of people coming in from upper Sindh and lower Punjab into Karachi, which is part of Sindh. These people are now being demonized, they are being criminalized, saying that they are coming and they are creating issues in Karachi, they are migrants. The way the Tunisian government is making migrants sit on the border of Libya. And 300 people killed as they were migrating from Pakistan and other parts of the world towards Europe. And they sank to the bottom of the sea. So, of course, when you don't have livelihood, you will go and try and find livelihood. So these families, entire women and men and the kids will come to Karachi and do domestic work. And so I asked them once, I was trying to find the chain of labor from the sugarcane areas to Karachi, and we did interviews with both sides. And they said, at least in Karachi, if we are domestic workers, when we work in people's homes, we get a meal for free because people will give away their, that is the very, very class-oriented stigma of not eating the basi yourself and giving it away to your workers. So they say we get that meal. We know that even if we are living a very hand-to-mouth life, but at least food is ensured. Can we ask the government of Pakistan? Can we ask the government of India or the Philippines? What have they done for these women who are being forced to migrate? Migrant workers, millions of migrant workers. Indonesia and Sri Lanka, less from Pakistan, but India and Sri Lanka, Nepal. Young girls are migrating. You travel from Nepal to any part of the world, every plane is filled with kids who are like about 20s, women and boys, young boys. I feel it's heartbreaking. How do these young people cope in a foreign country? And so it's a vicious circle, and you really have to study. And then you remember what happened in COVID-19. All these migrant workers who were stranded in Europe, in Dubai, and everywhere, they were starving, and there was a stigma. They were not being allowed to come out. So I think I'm very glad that CNS is doing this series of interviews, because I hope that our governments who are going to collect in New York in very fancy hotels at the expense of the people's taxes may hear this, what is happening in our countries.
Right. So, Azra Ji, the Women Deliver conference that's happening later this month, one of the largest conferences on gender equality. I mean, what expectations do you have from this conference?
Asking me something which I know very little about. I very rarely follow a lot of the international issues because most of us we work on the grassroots. I hope that there are good women there, and I hope there are women from the grassroots there. Conferences are very critical, and the papers that come out from there are very critical because they are a milestone. You can measure what happened. But I think the real work is on the ground.
Absolutely.
And without work on the ground, any number of conferences will not change anything.
Yes.
So for us who are very committed, I will not say that I have no expectation of conferences because it allows women to come together to learn, to do networking, to bond, and to hopefully create a greater force. But I think the real work is every day organizing on the ground.
Every day organizing on the ground. Lovely. That is a very, I think, a very powerful note to end our conversation on this note. This is so wonderful. Thank you for talking to us, Azra ji. It's been a pleasure.
So thank you so much, Sumita from Lucknow. I'm so happy to talk to you. Wish we could come across to each other's borders and meet in person, you know. So namaste and thank you very much. Adab.
Pleasure. Thank you, everyone. You were listening to Gender Equality Talks hosted by CNS. Today, we were talking to Azra Talat Sayeed, political activist from Pakistan. Thank you for listening in. And until next time, it's bye for now. Bye-bye.